All right, great. We're going to get started. Welcome to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We have participants from around the world. It's really exciting to see everyone introducing themselves in the chat. So thanks to those of you who are joining and saying hello to the group. My name is Kate Rademacher. I'm a Senior Technical Advisor at FHI 360, and I'm going to serve as your MC. We're going to start with just a few logistics, and first to say that we are going to be recording the session, so if you have tech issues or miss out on anything, not to worry, we'll be posting the recording. Please to keep yourself muted while we're talking. We're going to encourage everyone to post questions and comments in the chat bar, and we have a Q&A session at the end, so please be sharing your questions as we go along. I'm going to ask to move to the next slide and just say a brief introduction about the two organizations that are co-hosting this event. So we're delighted to be working with Policy Cures Research on this event. For those of you who aren't familiar, you're going to be hearing more from our colleague Maya in just a few moments, but I'll just say briefly, Policy Cures Research is a global think tank that's based in Sydney, Australia. The new G-Finder report on sexual and reproductive health is part of their flagship G-Finder project, which tracks annual investments in R&D, products and technologies which are designed to address persistent global health challenges that disproportionately affect people in low and middle income countries. So we're really delighted to be working with Policy Cures Research, and thank you for this collaboration. We also are delighted to share more about our Contraceptive Technology Innovation Exchange, which is a website that you'll be hearing more about from my colleague Amelia, and includes the Calliope database, which we'll be talking about quite a bit today. The CTI Exchange is a platform for increasing global access to resources on contraceptive research, development, registration, and introduction through collaboration and knowledge sharing. And the platform's managed by FHI 360 with funding from the Gates Foundation. Next slide, please. So just a few things to touch on again. We're going to be asking, as I mentioned, people to keep their audio off. We are recording it. We decided not to use video, but I'm just saying a quick hi with mine, and encourage you again to share in the chat bar with your questions and answers. I'm sorry, your questions. Next slide, please. So here's a brief overview of our agenda. As I mentioned, Maya from Policy Cures Research will be sharing about the G-Finder report. Then Amelia from FHI 360 will be talking about the Calliope database and the CTI Exchange platform more broadly. We're going to hear from our colleague Kirsten at the Gates Foundation about the donor perspective on contraceptive R&D. And then Lenita Dorflinger will share some reflections on the past and the future of contraceptive research and development. And as I mentioned, we are going to have a Q&A at the end. So I'm going to ask the speakers to introduce themselves as they begin, but just wanted to give you that overview now. Next slide, please. And you may have seen when we advertised this event that we called it a virtual getaway. And so we know that all of us are feeling perhaps fatigued by Zoom life. And so we just wanted to encourage you to view this as a 45-minute brief time to relax, focus on this important and exciting topic, perhaps put your email and multitasking away, think about really the future. Where do we want to head as a field in terms of contraceptive development, and how can we better serve women and men and couples around the world as we carry this important topic forward into the future. Next slide, please. Great, so I'm going to hand it over to Maya, and we'll be again checking the chat for questions throughout the event, so please post your comments and questions. Maya, can you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone. Next slide, thanks. Hi everyone, my name's Maya Goldstein. I'm a senior analyst at Policy Cures Research. I'm also the project lead on the sexual and reproductive health component of G-Finder. As Kate mentioned, G-Finder is a project that tracks annual investment in research and development for products and technologies to address persistent global health issues, and particularly those that affect people in low and middle income countries. We've been collecting and reporting on neglected disease R&D since 2007 and emerging infectious disease R&D since 2014. So this is actually the second time that we've collected and reported on sexual and reproductive health R&D data. The first time was a one-off report in 2014, which looked at 2013 data. This 2020 report looks at the global landscape for research and development for a spectrum of sexual and reproductive health issues for financial year 2018. Next slide, please. So because there was a 5-year gap between the first and the second project for sexual and reproductive health, we felt that a review of the scope was needed. So with the help of a broad stakeholder consultation and our expert advisory group, we reviewed a broad spectrum of sexual and reproductive health issues and filtered them based on 2 criteria. Whether that issue was a significant health issue affecting people in low and middle income countries, and whether that issue was driven in part or in full by a need for new products. So either there was none or new or improved products were needed. This helped us filter down and identify 7 specific sexual and reproductive health issues and associated product gaps, which we then surveyed across the sector for investments made in 2018. Next. Lastly, to be included in the report, the R&D needed to be for products that are appropriate to and suitable for LMIC contexts. As an example, they needed to be heat stable or easy to use. Next. The results here show there is quite a spectrum of investments across all the issues that we surveyed, with contraception R&D coming in at $64 million for 2018. Now, only 17% of you got that right from the questionnaire that you filled out at the registration. And since that was actually the highest figure that was available in the multiple choice, I'm guessing you all had quite low expectations about interest in this field. So maybe that's a positive. Next. I just wanted to point out very quickly that any orange text that you see throughout the rest of this presentation references the other figures from that questionnaire. Next slide. So what was this actually spent on? Well, most of the funding was spent on short-term methods, just over 1/3, and this was mostly for drugs. And this reflects an evolving area of research into novel short-term methods with longer durations of action, or that are user-controlled or non or less hormonal. For example, 6-monthly injectables as opposed to the 3-monthly injectable. Once monthly pills as opposed to daily oral contraceptive pills. So that's what that star-shaped pill is in the bottom right corner. This was followed by investments in long-acting and reversible methods, LARCs, at 18 million, and that was mostly for devices and combination products. For example, intrauterine systems and vaginal rings with longer duration of action, or that were more suitable for use in LMIC contexts. For example, we collected and reported on Pop Council's Anivera, which is the 1-year heat-stable vaginal ring in 2018, which was approved by the FDA later in that year. So that's a good news story from investment in contraceptive R&D. We reported much smaller amounts in on-demand methods and also in permanent methods. Next. Unsurprisingly, the majority of funding went to contraceptive R&D with female end users in mind, and just 14% for male contraceptive R&D. However, the latter is an evolving area of research with some really interesting products that are in clinical development at the moment, which is really exciting. Next. So who was providing this funding? Well, we found 14 funders in 2018. Foundation and the United States National Institute of Health being the dominant funders, providing over 2/3 of all funding to contraceptive R&D in 2018. This is a largely unchanged trend of public sector and philanthropic support for contraceptive R&D that has been propping up the sector for the last part of the decade, or more, in fact. But there was some interest from industry, and notably these were from women-focused, socially oriented small biotech companies. While this figure is aggregated, that means it's anonymized and lumped together, I can tell you there were only 3 organizations there. When you look at the sector breakdown, it's notable to see that 99% of public sector support from high-income countries came from the United States. Next. And so who was receiving this funding, and essentially, therefore, who was doing this R&D? Well, there were 70 recipients reported in 2018, but the top 12 actually made up 85% of the total. At the very top there was aggregate industry, which was comprised of 20 individual pharmaceutical companies and made up 40% of all the funding received. However, and I'm not just saying this because we're collaborating today, but FHI 360 was the single largest recipient of contraceptive R&D funding in 2018. And this was mostly for large-scale, long-term initiatives such as the CTI initiative and Envision FP. And while public and private sector organizations received the majority of the funding and near equal amounts, intermediaries did play an important role, receiving about 1/5 of the funding. And they do continue to play an important role, particularly in coordinating multi-partner, multifaceted contraceptive R&D programs. Next. So that was obviously a very, very, very quick run through. If you want to read more about contraceptive R&D investments for 2018 and for all those other issues that we surveyed, you can download the GFinder SRH report from our website. You can also access the data directly from our GFinder data portal. This is an interactive interface where you can create your own visualizations from the data. And you can do that for neglected disease R&D data, sexual and reproductive health, and emerging infectious disease will come shortly. We're currently collecting data for 2019. So we're hoping to be able to update our data portal annually, and we're planning to publish a SRH report biannually. Next. Thank you. I'm going to hand back to Kate now. I look forward to hearing your questions later.
Great, thank you so much, Maya. That's such a great resource, and I really appreciate all of the efforts collecting that data. I'm going to hand it now to Amelia to introduce herself and talk about Calliope and the CTI Exchange. Amelia?
Great, thank you, Kate, and hi to everybody. I'm Amelia McKenzie, and I'm an associate scientist in the Product Development and Introduction Department at FHI 360. And like Kate said, I'm going to give you a brief tour of Calliope and the broader CTI Exchange. Next slide. So Calliope houses information on potential contraceptive targets and leads in early development, as well as products in preclinical and clinical development, and a selection of products with limited market availability. The focus of the database is on novel and longer acting products and those that are under active development. And this year we launched a refresh of Calliope with new added entries to the database and improved searching features. Next slide. So here you'll see the refreshed Calliope homepage, and on the top left, highlighted in the blue box, you'll see how to get to our about, how to use, and glossary pages. And highlighted in the next blue box are the database searching options. So we have a keyword search and various filters to sort by features like duration or user sex, active pharmaceutical ingredient or API, etc. Next slide. If we scroll down a bit on the homepage, you can see there are 2 ways to view the database entries. The first view shown here displays the entries by development phase. And as highlighted by the blue box, you can see the database entries along the entire pipeline now, or you can click the tabs for discovery and early development, preclinical and clinical development, and limit market availability to view the entries for just those phases of development. The second view displays entries by the expected or intended user sex and whether it's hormonal or not. So to see this view, you click the View by User Type button highlighted by the blue box. Next slide. And here is that second view with user sex on the left and hormonal and non-hormonal on the top. And to expand each of these lists, click the plus sign highlighted by the blue box. And next slide. For example, here we can see the expanded list for the hormonal male entries. And we can get back to viewing the by development phase by clicking the button here at the top highlighted by the blue box. Next slide. And back in the development phase, I'll note one neat feature. Next slide. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll see highlighted by the blue box, you can export the entire database of your filtered search results as a PDF or a CSV file. Next slide. Scrolling back up here, I'll show you a bit more about our searching features. Next slide. If we use the keyword search to look up EPIN, for example, our results update to see two related entries, EPO55 and EPIN. EPIN is a target indicated by the bullseye icon and EPO55 is a lead. And if we click on the target name, like for all entries in the database, we're taken to the entry's full profile. Next slide. So this is, for example, EPIN's profile, full profile that has alternative names, a brief description, details like the user sex, role in reproduction, a link to the profile for this lead, EPO55. And if we were to scroll down, we could see details on the development status and references and links to more information. Next slide. So that's Calliope in a very brief nutshell, and I hope you've gotten a taste for how to use the database and what's contained in it. I'd also like to briefly mention a couple of other, you might call them sister databases. Next slide. The first is the Contraceptive Infertility Target Database that's maintained by colleagues at NICHD and features information on expression profiles and animal infertility phenotypes. Next slide. And the second is from our colleagues at the Initiative for Multipurpose Prevention Technologies, IMPT, who have a great database of multi-purpose products, a number of which include a pregnancy prevention indication. Next slide. Before I finish, I'll just mention the wider CTI Exchange briefly. And Kate gave a brief introduction, but the CTI Exchange houses Calliope and our other featured databases, but it also is a broad platform for colleagues and partners to share information and resources that support contraceptive research and development and registration and introduction. And this is with a real emphasis on expanding access in low resource settings. The site includes information about early and late stage contraceptive technologies that are under development, resources on product testing and quality assurance, international regulatory requirements, and strategies for product introduction. Next slide. We've also launched this year a refresh of the CTI Exchange website, and here's a quick look at the homepage. Highlighted by the orange box, you can see our About page describing the goals of the CTI Exchange and why we developed it. Updates with various news and announcement posts, like the three you see highlighted here at the bottom of the screen, one about an event in the fall hosted by colleagues at the Society for the Study of Reproduction and the International Society of Endocrinology. And this is an event on contraceptive discovery and innovation. You also see today's event here highlighted, as well as a post about the GFinder report we just heard about from Maya. We also do periodic blog series, including a recent one on how non-hormonal contraceptive benefits can factor into contraceptive R&D. And we also have a number of resources like Calliope and the other databases on drug-drug interactions and contraceptive active pharmaceutical ingredients, as well as a broad resource library with over 150 other resources relevant to contraceptive R&D. So I thank you for letting me take you on this brief getaway to explore Calliope and the CTI Exchange. And we hope these will continue to be useful resources for you as we continue to provide more information and update them and add entries to Calliope. And we welcome your input and feedback at ctiexchange@fhi360.org.
Great. Thank you so much, Amelia. That was great. And as Amelia said, that was a whirlwind overview, but many of you on the line have been guest bloggers and have contributed content to the CTI Exchange website. And we hope that that will continue into the future. We really see the website as a platform for knowledge sharing and collaboration, and this event is part of that. So thanks, Amelia, for walking us through that. Now we're going to hand it over to Kirsten from the Gates Foundation. Kirsten, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and share some of your perspectives from a donor perspective on where we're heading with contraceptive R&D.
Thanks very much, Kate. Hello to everybody. My name is Kirsten Vogelsong. I am a Senior Program Officer for Contraceptive Development at the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation in Seattle, Washington, USA. I've spent a career supporting research to develop improved and new methods of contraception for women, men, and couples in low resource settings. And I'm so pleased to be part of today's event. Thank you so much. The Policy Cures Research G-Finder report, the CTI Exchange, and the Calliope database all provide really valuable resources to the contraceptive research and development community, to funders like ourselves, to policymakers, to researchers, those working in the lab, and those family planning programmers on the front lines who are looking to see what new innovations might be available to better to serve their communities and their clients. I'm excited to see so many participants on today's webinar. There are lots of familiar names here and some new names. We have folks from around the world and across many sectors: private sector, public sector, funders, implementers. And I don't think that we would have had this level of participation at this kind of event 15 years ago or even 10 years ago. So that's really exciting to me to see our community growing. When I joined the Gates Foundation 8 years ago, the Foundation's family planning strategy had just launched a contraceptive research and development initiative. This was relatively small in 2012, but did mark an important moment in family planning philanthropy. Most other foundations and non-government funders had discontinued their research and development support to contraception, and the Gates Foundation recognized this as an underfunded, neglected area where the foundation's resources could play a significant role. Since that time, we've had the Family Planning 2020 event. We've had discussion on the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, and we've really seen that not just the Foundation's interest, but also global interest in research and development has increased and expanded along with those global conversations. Within the Foundation, we have continued interest in supporting contraceptive research and development. We will remain a significant funder in this area. Hopefully the next time we're together to discuss a Policy Cures research, maybe we'll even see a broader range of funders. But for now, I can confirm that this will remain a priority area for the Foundation. And we're really looking at two aspects of contraceptive R&D. One is improving hormonal methods for women. And the second is supporting drug discovery and development for non-hormonal products. While the resources committed to contraceptive R&D globally have remained fairly stable for decades, or even slightly decreased, I'm optimistic about the field, and I'm optimistic about the future of the field, and I'm optimistic for two reasons. And as with much of the world today, the two reasons are two things that I think that as a funder we're really looking to signals from science and from people. So with respect to science, there's new science in drug discovery and drug development, new tools, new technologies, new platforms as we think about moving from low throughput models to high throughput models, thinking about omics, thinking about genetics, genomics, diversity amongst our population, thinking about individual variabilities in responses to drugs, thinking about using the tools that have been used in infertility to apply to contraception. So the tools for drug development, drug discovery have evolved over the last few decades. These have been applied to non-communicable diseases and so-called rich world medical conditions, but haven't yet been applied to contraceptive research and development. We do have a fantastic opportunity now to seize these tools and apply them to sexual and reproductive health product development that will make a difference for women, men, and couples in low resource settings. We also have science and tools that allow for greater collaboration worldwide. You know, it's often you would hear struggles of scientists who were trying to collaborate with other researchers within their own institution. And now we're seeing increasing collaboration, not just across institutions, but across state lines in the US, across country lines, across continents, across time zones. And so this is a really exciting, I think, time for what's been a small community of researchers in contraceptive R&D to expand, to really build upon not just the product development tools that we have in the lab, but also the technology tools that allow us to collaborate and work together as a community. So people, why am I optimistic about people? We do have a passionate, dedicated cohort of scientists who are supporting contraceptive R&D, and that is infectious. And we've seen the number of scientists and the number of labs who have been engaged in contraception growing and expanding over the last few years. We've seen more publications in peer-reviewed scientific journals calling for increased resources, increased support to contraceptive R&D. And this is a really big part of stimulating increased funding and interest in the area, and a really big part of increasing industry engagement in the area as well. Sort of creating a rallying cry for advocating for better tools for women's health, better tools for women and couples and men to be able to plan their families. And in terms of people, I think we're doing a better job as a field understanding our users and reasons for non-use. We're applying more sophisticated market research tools, more sophisticated mixed methods research to really understand the nuances around why women, men, and couples are not using the current contraceptive methods. And this is really important to us as we think about what are the new methods, what are the opportunities that we have. The resources available are not sufficient to bring every product that's listed in the Calliope database to market. And we need to make some tough choices, especially as we're thinking about adding new products and methods to that database. So those tough choices will really be driven by how well we understand the current gaps in contraceptive use and how well we understand what users want. This is changing over time. Women and men do not want the same methods that their grandmothers used. The world is very different. So the better we understand that, the better we'll be able to meet those needs. So the publications that I referred to, these are really exciting, and I think that we'll continue to see additional publications calling for increased investment in contraceptive R&D. All of these make a solid case for such investment. The Gates Foundation will continue to be a major funder in contraceptive R&D, supporting researchers, supporting the development of tools for the research community, such as the G-Finder report, such as the CTI Exchange and the Calliope database, as well as research and development tools. Importantly, we'll continue to closely partner with other donors and funders who support this work, and any others, any new funders, any new donors who want to join in this movement. We really need to ensure that limited resources do go farther, that we're efficiently using these resources, that we don't have redundancies, and that we're making decisions to benefit the populations that we're trying to serve. I think we have a great opportunity to be working on products that have dual market appeal. So I'm excited to see that the Policy Cures research report is not just focused on low income settings for contraceptive R&D, because I think that a new product will have universal appeal. And I think that this is a way that we can reach out to expand our community and to inspire others. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kirsten. That was really a great overview and great comments. I got a question from the chat, and people are still encouraged to enter their questions and comments into the chat, and we're going to have some time to ask Kirsten some questions in just a few moments. But first, I'm going to hand it over to Lenita from FHI 360. Lenita, if you can start by introducing yourself and then sharing some of your reflections would be great.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lenita Dorflinger, and I'm the Director of Product Development and Introduction at FHI 360. I've been involved in contraceptive technology research and development for over 30 years, and today I've been asked to spend a few minutes reflecting on the past and the future of contraceptive R&D. And to do so, I'm going to tell you 5 reasons why I'm excited. And in fact, it turns out that I'm excited for many of the same reasons that Kirsten is excited. I think most of us are aware that multinational pharmaceutical companies largely abandoned contraceptive discovery and R&D programs in the last 3 decades, and public sector funding has consequently fueled research for contraceptive technology development, albeit at a slower pace than might have been seen had there been big pharma input. The greatest innovations in contraception over the last 30 years have been developed by non-governmental organizations funded through public sector and government investments. Indeed, many of the longer-acting reversible contraceptives, or LARCs, that are increasingly used worldwide, such as contraceptive implants and hormonal intrauterine systems, were conceptualized and developed largely with public sector support, and then manufactured and introduced broadly through licensing with the private sector. We heard from, so think about Norplant or Jadel implants, or Mirena, the levonorgestrel intrauterine system. They were all developed by the Population Council with heavy funding from the public sector. So the good news now is that support from the public sector in contraceptive R&D is continuing. But more exciting is what we just heard from Kirsten, which is that philanthropic foundation investments are rising. And we heard from Maya that the Gates Foundation was the largest investor or donor in contraceptive R&D in 2018, but that was closely followed by the US NIH and also USAID. A third thing I find exciting is the expanding number of novel partnerships across NGOs, academia, small biotech, pharma, foundations, public sector donors, and Kirsten mentioned this as well. These partnerships leverage the strength of the various players and accelerate innovation, particularly in a space where funding is limited. And across these partnerships, donor coordination is increasing, and that's opened opportunities to leverage cross-donor support. Fourth, as Kirsten also mentioned, discovery. Funding for discovery is expanding. I think this is a new investment area. And it's focusing on identifying and validating potential new pharmaceutical targets for non-hormonal contraceptive approaches, both for male and female. And that could lead to new products with improved side effect profiles, for example, in the case of women, or to products in the case of males. The rapid scientific and technical advances that Kirsten talked about are creating so many more opportunities than we ever had in the past to identify and develop new and novel products. And we know such advances have been applied to many other therapeutic areas, and finally, optimistically, I think, to contraception. A fifth reason to be excited, again, was something that Kirsten mentioned, and I think as user-centered design is being increasingly emphasized to ensure that products will better meet the needs and the desires of potential users. Over the past few years, multiple ideation events have given voice to women to better understand the shortcomings of existing methods and consider their ideas as we design new options. And gathering user preference and acceptability at multiple stages of product development informs both design and investment strategies. And as my colleagues say, this is the key to developing methods that people want and methods that people will use. And finally, because contraceptives are used for long durations by largely healthy individuals, there's increasing consideration to how products might provide non-contraceptive benefits to users. And I consider multi-purpose prevention technologies to actually fall into this category. And we saw there's a large amount of funding going into that area. But this topic is much broader than that, and it includes potential benefits related to either health, for example, disease reduction, or to lifestyle, such as reducing bleeding, which is something that is desired by many women. So I'll end by pointing those of you who haven't seen it to the August issue of Biology of Reproduction, which focuses on contraceptive development. And it's a real treasure trove of information, including more than 20 articles on a breadth of topics aimed to excite investigators and investors in contraceptive drug discovery and development. And we'll post a link to that on our website. But I hope that these reasons for my excitement, I hope are reflected by, I know are reflected by many others. And I'm looking to the future to see new advances finally being made in this space at a more rapid rate. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Lenita. It's really encouraging and infectious to hear your enthusiasm as well as Kirsten's, and I think that this is an exciting discussion and moment. So we're going to move now into the Q&A. We've gotten several great comments and questions in the chat, so I'm going to curate those. I think if we can start with a question that Jeff Spieler asked about how MPTs were characterized in the G-Finder report. So Maya, can I ask you to respond to that question?
Yeah, sure, no worries. Yes, so I read your question, Jeff, and that's absolutely right. Of course, MPTs, by their definition, sort of hover or straddle the spectrum of HIV, contraception, and STIs. And we decided, because it was such a valid field of research in its own right, that it needed its own chapter in the report. So any products or any R&D that was geared towards MPTs or was classified as an MPT, we kept in that chapter, and we kept all specific contraceptive R&D separately. However, we did talk about some quite exciting investments that were in the MPT chapter within the contraceptive chapter, if that makes sense. Because when you do include those figures, which I think is what you're alluding to, it does shift the picture a little bit on where funding's being spent, particularly on what kind of methods and by whom. So I totally take that on board. The report itself in the discussion talks a little bit about that as well, and about how when you include those figures, it doesn't make such an impact on HIV R&D broadly, but it does change the picture a bit for STIs and for contraception in particular.
Great, thank you, Maya, for addressing that. So just since we have a lot of great comments, I'm going to move on to the next topic. We got a two-part question from Agnes at UNFPA, and she asked about male contraception, which is often, and quite frequently a topic of intense interest. So Amelia, I was hoping maybe you could speak about male contraception. And also Agnes asked about potential development of a generic one-rod implant or an alternate one-rod implant. And I think we also had a question from Sarah Stratton about sort of how generic manufacturers and generics are being included in the overall ecosystem. So after we hear from Amelia about male contraception, Kirsten, I was hoping maybe you could speak about the role of generics more broadly, including perhaps one-rod implants, if you're able to speak to that. And of course, anyone also can comment on male contraception as desired. So Amelia, can I ask you to speak?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kate. And thanks for the question. I think it's often we talk about R&D, it's like, well, where are the male methods? And there are many colleagues, Pop Council and other organizations that have been working in this field for a long time to try and move methods forward. And more recently, the Male Contraceptive Initiative has really stimulated research in this area. I think what's sort of interesting and somewhat contradictory to the method mix we see now is actually when we look at the reproductive biology research, we see that there are many more male targets. Actually, the male reproductive tract seems to have significantly more unique genes than the female reproductive tract, and if, for example, thousands of enriched genes are found in the testis. So I think that there's real opportunity now that there seems to be building momentum and interest to move some really promising and intriguing, particularly non-hormonal male methods for some of these targets forward. So I think it's an important question to never stop asking, and one that I hope that I don't want to be too optimistic, but I hope in the not too distant future we have an answer to say, well, look at all these new male methods, because it's a really important need that's not being met by our current mix completely.
Great, thanks, Amelia. Kirsten, can I ask you to speak about the role of generics, and if you want to add anything about male methods, that would be great too, of course.
Sure. No, I'm glad that that Amelia mentioned the male contraception initiative. Their resources offer a great overview on sort of the status of the male contraceptive R&D field, and some of the Gates Foundation's discovery work is focusing on developing tools and platforms for male methods, and the National Institutes of Health is supporting some clinical trials and non-clinical work related to male contraceptive R&D as well. So those are some great resources to look to. With respect to generics, I think generics are a really important sector in our field, particularly as we're looking to improve upon the existing hormonal contraceptives for women, and particularly where generics can help to address some of the cost barriers that our field experiences. We're a high, for a global public sector, highly price and cost sensitive field, and so really important to be engaging generics companies as we look to expand access to existing hormonal methods and to new hormonal methods as they are evolving. I actually don't have any information on a generic single rod implant. Maybe someone else on the line does. I do not. But also thinking about generics, the Reproductive Health Supplies Coalition does have a group where generic manufacturers can be engaged and discuss their role in contraception. Some generics have capacity for R&D when we're thinking about more upstream work. Others are more manufacturing based, but important to engage that sector across the whole, what we would call the value chain, or the end-to-end of product development and manufacturing commercialization.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Kirsten. I'm also, Megan Christofield from Trapigo asked about to speak a little bit more about the role of user market research, and I think that's a really important point. We've talked about the user throughout this event, but Lenita and Kirsten, perhaps you could speak a little bit about that. I also just wanted to point everyone's attention, just before we move on the topic of male contraception, to Samia's comment in the sidebar about some of Pop Council's research that's underway with male contraception. So Lenita, can you speak a little bit about perhaps user-centered design and market research, acceptability research? And again, also Kirsten, I would ask you to speak to that a bit as well.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Kate. I think a number of groups, ourselves included, are using, are looking and using acceptability research and user perspective research for all of the various new approaches that we're looking at. And my colleagues, led by Rebecca Callahan, have published recently on several studies we've done. Let me just, because of time, use one example. We're doing investments in, supported by the Gates Foundation as well as USAID, on microarray patches for contraception, and we're using user-centered design research and iterative fashion to help us refine the design characteristics of that product by getting ongoing user feedback, and initially actually did some work looking at the desires of women for duration of action, size, location, and trade-offs between side effects and certain design characteristics. So we're using that that's just one example of what we're doing in real time, using this user-centered design research to inform the product development area.
Great, thanks, Lenita. Kirsten, do you want to add there?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kate and Lenita. This is an area that the Foundation's very excited about continuing to fund. I'm not sure if the investments in human-centered design or user research are reflected in the GFinder report, but they are investments that we consider part of our overall contraceptive R&D portfolio, because we use them specifically to inform how products are designed, trade-offs in our portfolio, priorities, and really essential and critical to continue to advance the conversation, particularly with industry, as we say, look, this is what we're hearing. This is what women need. These are the shortcomings of current methods, and these are the opportunities that we have as a community, as funders, as manufacturers, to meet the needs of, to meet unmet needs of women and couples, and to sort of increase that, the market, if you will, to put it in industry terms.
Great, thank you so much, Kirsten. So there's also been an important question in the sidebar from Edith about non-contraceptive benefits, and that's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. We are currently, I think Amelia mentioned it, but I'll mention it again, have a blog series on the CTI Exchange focused on contraceptive side benefits and how we can reimagine some contraceptive side effects as side benefits, both for existing methods and for R&D. So I think that's a really important and exciting topic. Again, maybe I can ask, invite any one of the panelists who wants to speak about this. Lenita, maybe I can ask you to kick us off, and then Amelia or Kirsten, if you want to jump in.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I think there's an underappreciation for the non-contraceptive benefits, as you've pointed out, of some of the existing methods, particularly around bleeding side effects and in some cases the ability to regulate the length of your menstrual cycle. But we're considering things that might be broader than that. And I think for decades, people have talked about developing contraceptives that have side benefits like reducing risks of certain diseases, and that's an area of great interest. I do think it's hard, though, in setting out with a contraceptive design to actually, one can have that in your target product profile, but it's a very difficult target to be exploring at the same time you're doing the actual R&D for your contraceptive development and registration. It's something that I think one can attempt to design into new methods, but it's a more difficult hurdle to achieve in the short term.
Great, thanks, Lenita. Kirsten or Amelia, do you want to add there?
This is Kirsten. I don't have anything to add. That was a great response.
Okay, great. Amelia?
Yeah, I agree, and I'm just conscious of the time as well here.
Great. So yeah, so just as a reminder, we had committed to keeping this event to 8:45 Eastern Time so that people would have time to have a transition to your next meeting. So I think it is time to wrap up. I just want to add one shout out for a future event. We are planning to host a follow-on event this fall focused on contraceptive-induced menstrual changes. And I think some of the questions about non-contraceptive benefits will bleed into that discussion, get it? And so look forward to sharing more about that event with this community in the coming weeks, and stay tuned. But just want to thank everyone for the incredibly rich discussion. We have recorded this session and we'll post it on the CTI Exchange. Want to again thank our colleagues at Policy Cures Research for their important work with the GFinder report and encourage you to check that out. And as Maya mentioned, collection is underway for the 2019 report. Just to also thank Kirsten for speaking to us about the donor perspective and for the ongoing support of the Gates Foundation as well as other donors in this community, and to all of the partners who joined the call from various sectors, nonprofit, pharma, academia, et cetera. As we've discussed today, just really the excitement and the passion and the commitment across sectors is growing for contraceptive R&D, and so this is an exciting moment and look forward to carrying this work into the future. Again, thank you, and we will pause here and wish you all a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.